Tech with high expectations, and he will end his Red Raider career as a legend. We are going to review the incredible 2021-22 season from Bryson Williams coming up on today's Locked On Texas Tech.
You are Locked On Texas Tech, your daily podcast on the Texas Tech Red Raiders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Texas Tech, a member of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for making Locked On Texas Tech your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. Be sure that you have subscribed to our channel. If you have not already, you can find us on YouTube at Locked On Texas Tech. Just search us in the search bar and we will come right up. Today, we are beginning our player performance reviews from last season. The basketball as of this morning is over. College basketball has come to an end, and so we get to fully just bask in the goodness that was Texas Tech's first season under Mark Adams. And there's no better player to start off with than Bryson Williams. I mean, this is a guy that, Emery, we spent so much airtime talking about before he was even a Red Raider. His recruitment lasted a while, kind of a rare, long recruitment process in the portal. He spent a lot of time examining his options. We spent multiple episodes talking about, hey, if this guy comes in, he's going to be really, really good, especially if he plays better defensively, especially if he shoots the three better. And I don't think either of us ever could have predicted the Bryson Williams that we got at Texas Tech.
Yeah, I mean, we saw a player that came into Tech already extremely well regarded. I mean, he was the leader at UTEP for multiple seasons after coming from Fresno State with Rodney Terry and having a good couple seasons there as well. And yet his game took another leap this year. And more than that, I feel like he really assumed the leadership role of this team, at least from an on-court standpoint. And it was needed. I feel like the evolution of his shot is probably the biggest tangible skill that he could have developed. We were talking about it in the offseason about just how good of a shooter can he be. But I don't think either of us expected him to become a 41% shooter on relatively decent volume. We thought it was going to be closer to that 35, 36% as a best case scenario. And that was assuming he maintained low volume, which as it turns out, he ended up shooting almost 100 threes, which isn't a huge sample, but it's enough to get a good idea of what a good shooter he was. So for Bryson Williams, I mean, this season was one of the best offensive seasons I think we've seen from a Tech big in a long time. I think that his individual skill set and being able to score at all three levels really allowed the offense to open up. And I feel like defensively, he made another step as well. So, I mean, obviously, we've talked about Bryson Williams extensively on this podcast, but coming into the season and then obviously a lot over the course of this season. And I guess the biggest thing is just to have a player that can score at all three levels as versatile as he is offensively and made such a big step between his senior and COVID year. I mean, it's impressive, and it really worked out for this Tech team.
Yeah, I remember in the offseason, you were kind of talking me down about his shot because I was very, very bullish on it. And I think I still had him projected to shoot like 33, 34%. And like never could have seen him coming in, and he ends the season leading the team in three-point percentage, the only guy that shoots above 40%, second in three-point makes, and third in three-point attempts. Just an unbelievable floor spacer. It's really difficult to imagine what Texas Tech's offense would have looked like had he not been able to make so many, those top of the key three-pointers that he made where he was just dead on with the basket. I mean, you take a look at his college career. That last season at UTEP, he shot 19 of 68 from deep. That's 27.9%. His last season at Texas Tech, of course, 40 of 96. That's 41.7%. Just an absolutely unbelievable turnaround. And Texas Tech would have looked like a far more inferior team had it not been for that shooting turnaround.
Yeah, I really think it acted as a get out of jail free card for Tech in a lot of cases. And I mean, you look at, we'll get into the individual games later, but some of the games where he really struggled in, you saw it reflected in Tech's offense, and particularly when he wasn't shooting it well from outside or not shooting at all, it really sort of collapsed the floor down. People weren't able to, the defense wasn't able to respect the pick and pop threat. And I really think that opened up the floor. And for Bryson Williams, that was an added benefit because, I mean, like you mentioned, I was low on the shot coming in. I was really happy to be wrong because, I mean, I did not imagine him being able to consistently shoot above 40%. More than that, like the quality of looks that he were getting, sure, most of the threes he took were open ones from the top of the key, but he had no hesitation with it. And he was willing to take the shot. I can't remember all that many times where he passed up a wide open three that wasn't like real situational. And so, I mean, for me, Bryson Williams' confidence as a shooter really raised. You look at his free throws as well. They weren't quite as good as his last 2 years at UTEP, but still, to go from being a sub 65% shooter in his 2 years at Fresno to really being floating around the 75 to 80% range throughout the season, it's incredibly impressive. And I mean, as a whole, I think the growth that Williams had on the offensive end was impressive, but also defensively. I mean, his ability to switch really saved Tech. I think it allowed you to run more of those two big lineups that coming into the season, we were a little bit sketched out about how Kevin O'Banner and Bryson Williams could both function, given that both of them seemingly had their limitations with switchability. So again, I mean, Williams really showed what he could do as a perimeter defender and then also was passable as a rim protector. So I think as a whole, like Bryson Williams' season was one of evolution for him as a player because he somehow improved his game from UTEP while facing tougher competition consistently and being forced into being the number one option night in and night out.
Yeah, I love that you brought up defense because that felt like the one thing that I was really having difficulty talking myself into over the course of the offseason was just watching his defensive tape and kind of just being hesitant about how he would match up against Big 12 guards. And then obviously he comes in, he has an unbelievable offseason. You just hear reports all offseason that he's the first guy in the gym every day, working out like crazy, getting it in with Darby Rich like every single day. And then he finally gets on the floor and he's just a perfectly switchable defender. Like his ability to defend Big 12 guards at points in the season was surreal. Like I could not believe what I was watching at times this season. And you look at his rate stats, his steal percentage didn't increase at all. It's the exact same as it was his last year at UTEP. And then his block percentage increased just 0.3%. But this is why you got to watch tape, man. The sheer value of what Bryson Williams provided for you on the defensive end, it's beyond value. I mean, your entire defensive system does not work if Bryson Williams does not come in and play the level of defense that he played. And if that's the case, then he's going to be getting subbed out much more often than you'd like. And as we know now, Bryson Williams became he became the most important part of Texas Tech's offense. And so to think about how all of it came together, just absolutely extraordinary for him to put that much effort into improving his defensive game. He said that's why he wanted to come to Texas Tech, and boy, it is easy to see that he meant that now.
Yeah, and just in general, I mean, he took over a role that I don't really think a lot of Tech fans anticipated for him, which was being the guy. And obviously, I mean, we had our qualms about the post usage at times, but as a whole, I mean, it was for good reason. He was extremely efficient in the post. He was able to really develop a straight line drive game at points in the season, which caught us off guard, man. I mean, I did not expect that, but as a whole, I mean, his offensive ability and ability to be sort of that lead guy, regardless of if he was working in the post, working off of drives, or working off of the pick and pop, I think it really opened up the floor. And I mean, obviously the defensive end is where I think we've sort of were the most surprised because we knew offensively, even if we didn't expect the shot to develop as much as it did, or for him to be confident as a driver, we still knew the post ability and the ability to score off a screen and roll action. So for him to be the defender that he was and not get taken off the floor, I mean, he was able to play pretty much any situation in any lineup. And I think that's something that really can't be overstated because that allowed you to sort of run the two big lineup. It allowed you to see more of O'Banner and more of Marcus Santos Silva. And that was key down the stretch of the season. That allowed you to play two of your better players alongside Williams and then not be an issue. So can't be overstated how much of an improvement he made defensively. And I really think that the stats won't necessarily do it justice per se, but if you watched and you saw teams were trying to take advantage of him on switches, we saw that throughout the season and it just did not work for them. So really impressive in that from by Bryson.
Yeah, it's just insane to see the turnaround there and how much it contributed to Texas Tech's success overall. But going to be talking about some of his individual performances. I'm sure there's an opponent that we will highlight specifically, but first, a quick word from Built Bar. This is the time of year that I've pretty much given up on all my New Year's resolutions, but not this year. I'm sticking to my resolution to eat right thanks to Built Bar. It almost feels like it's not a resolution because I actually enjoy eating Built Bar products. They're not just a protein bar, they're a treat. And they're covered in 100% real chocolate. They're low in calorie, high in protein. Replace your candy bars with these, they are better. Go to built.com and scroll down the macros chart, you'll be blown away. They're high in protein, low in calorie, high in fiber, low in carb. Go to built.com today to get your hands on some of your own. Thanks again for making Locked On Texas Tech your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. Here talking the great Bryson Williams, a Texas Tech player who was here for just a year, but will surely not be forgotten. Emery, if you will, go back in time with me to the first couple of weeks of the season. We watched Bryson Williams play his first 4 games, and he looks like a really good player. I mean, 22 against North Florida, 16 against Grambling, 18 against Prairie View, A&M, and then 10 against Incarnate Word in a game where he barely played. And all of a sudden, it goes down the garbage drain. He plays a really bad game against Omaha, gets himself in foul trouble, plays a pretty good game against Lamar, but then the Providence and the Tennessee games, we were ready to burn down the house on Bryson Williams, man. It just felt like he had overnight become a liability and was just not contributing to this team in a positive manner. He gets things back on track a little bit against Arkansas State, and then, the Gonzaga game was not pretty. Obviously, you have to consider level of competition, but it was a difficult stretch, man. And you look at those 4 games, Providence, Tennessee, Arkansas State, and Gonzaga, he scored 7 points per game on 32.4% shooting from the field with nearly 2 assists per game and less than 3 rebounds a game. And to think that we're talking about a first-team All-Big 12 guy who had that stretch. I mean, go back with me and tell me what was going through your mind those 4 games and just what was this turnaround like to watch?
Oh, I'll raise one up on this one. Bryson Williams, if you combine the Tennessee, Providence, and Gonzaga games, shot a combined, So for one thing, he had the stretch where he shot 4 of 21 from 2-point range in those 3 games. Under 20%. His 3-pointers, he was better somehow and made, I believe, 2 of 7 during that time frame. So you had a 3-game stretch where he was shooting 6 of 28, and the Arkansas State game was in the middle of that. But for all intents and purposes, it was the same stretch of the season against his first 3 top quality opponents. We saw it, and I mean, at that point, I thought it was over. I had seen enough. I'd seen basically a 60-minute sample of him looking vastly outmatched against guys. And there was the decision-making that really was frustrating because on the inside, he was taking tough looks, and I feel like he was just forcing things. He was taking looks that weren't the ones that he was taking early on in the season. And, I mean, really for about a 2-week stretch there, the lack of patience and kind of just forcing things up really sort of hindered him, I would say. And then beyond that, I mean, he was also missing looks that he would go on to make throughout the season. Like, I mean, his mid-range game just went absolutely cold in that stretch. And I think that that's one of the contributing factors to why maybe he looked so bad, is because he had a stretch where he basically shot 10% from the mid-range for 2 weeks. Like, so for me to go through that stretch, I was convinced that maybe you have to start thinking about seriously pulling him out of the rotation, because you also combine that with Daniel Baccio looking really good against Tennessee. You had O'Banner having his moments in those games, and you had Marcus Santos Silva, who by that time we'd already seen some of the defensive impacts he was making. So, I mean, I thought it was maybe unsalvageable, and that ended up being obviously really premature, but it was worth questioning because you've got a guy coming from a mid-major school. You haven't seen him be the lead guy in a role. In the first 3 games, he was a black hole, basically. Like, just being blunt, that was kind of what happened. When his shots weren't falling, he wasn't making good decisions passing the ball. He wasn't a particularly massive positive on defense. So, like, what did he give you? But thankfully for us, that turned around. And I really think the first Kansas game was the one that sort of switched that gear in that overdrive, because obviously it came a couple weeks after that stretch, but really that first Kansas game at home was sort of the tipping point. And after that, I think he never looked back.
Yeah, man. Something about Kansas just manages to get him back on track. But it's really insane that we're talking about a guy that had a 4-21 shooting slump from 2-point range and ended up leading the Big 12 in field goal percentage and effective field goal percentage. It's just an absolutely insane turnaround. And this is a guy that was generating shots from behind the perimeter as well. And the degree of difficulty that he was taking on shots around the rim was not low. I mean, this guy just found a way to make turnarounds, hook shots, bunnies, floaters. You mentioned the straight line drives on the first segment. Like, it would make sense almost if like this was a Udoka Azubuike type and was just like straight up bullying guys on the block. But like Bryson Williams had finesse. Like he a way to make difficult shots with just like effortless, like there's no effort. He just made it look so easily. And so I think to reflect on that stretch is important, because there was a time where it looked like he may be a guy that couldn't even play minutes on this team, and he comes back and he obviously becomes the best player on your team. But you mentioned that first Kansas game. Obviously, he's developed a bit of a reputation for himself when playing against Kansas. But as you reflect on his remarkable season last year, what do you think was Bryson Williams' best performance as a Red Raider?
Okay, the first Kansas game I want to touch on real quick, because he had 22 points, 3 assists, and it wasn't the best number from a pure statistical standpoint, but I think it was really critical to getting his confidence back. And he shot efficiently in that game and really made some good decisions off of passes, which with the way Tech was cutting and being shorthanded without McCullough and TJ was really important that he was making those good decisions and not forcing things. But best game of the year, no question, in Allen Fieldhouse against Kansas again. 33 points, really efficient. I mean, you're talking about a guy that when the game went into overtime, he willed Tech in that first overtime period. And his ability to hit threes, he was 4 of 4 in that game. His only game all year where he ended up hitting 4 threes. And he did so outside of the Montana State game. But it's for only regular season game where he had 4 threes. And he did so on really good efficiency too. And like, did not miss a single 3-point shot. His 2-point range was really good as well. Tech had to rely on him so much in that game. They were throwing the ball into the post even when Kansas was sending an aggressive double. It was ridiculous. And for Williams to almost will Tech to that win and really just show out again against Kansas, for me, it was easily the highlight of the season, even though it didn't lead to a win. Like, that's one of those games that's going to go down in history for Tech, and not just because of the individual performance by Bryson Williams, so just because of how hard fought that game was, and the fact that for every punch that Ochai Agbaji and that KU team had, Bryson Williams and Tech came back with another one, and it was a phenomenal night. Obviously for Williams, for me, that stands out from him. I'm sure there were a lot of really efficient performances for him, but that one game really sticks out compared to everything else.
Yeah, 33 in Fog Allen is going in the books pretty easily. I mean, that was an incredible performance by him. Just kept making shot after shot, and it was really impressive. That's obviously the best game I watched from him this season. But I want to give a little bit of a hat tip to his game against Duke. I thought that he played really, really well in that game, especially even when matched up with guys like Mark Williams and these really athletic guys like Banchero. He just found a way to put the ball in the basket. And, he goes 8 of 16 from the floor in 34 minutes. He's talking trash to the Duke guys a bunch, which is like kind of hilarious, but you also love it. Like, this is a Bryson Williams guy who's like very mild mannered, like well respected in the locker room. But like when he starts taking the punches, like he gives them back. And I think that gave your team a lot of energy that you needed on that night to stay in the fight for all 40 minutes. Obviously, Texas Tech doesn't end up winning that game, but Bryson Williams, I think you look at his 21 points and you've just got to think that Texas Tech is not in a position where they're battling with Duke in the final minutes without those 21 points. And something really remarkable, he shot 6 of 13 from 2-point range, which is 46.2%, which is good. Like, that's a good night for you to have on the degree of difficulty that he takes shots against a really, really good Duke team, that 46.2% is the lowest 2-point percentage he had since the Oklahoma loss. Just an absolutely insane, consistent player that Oklahoma lost the only regular season Big 12 game where he scored in single digits. Phenomenal player.
And talking about the Oklahoma loss, he came back against Oklahoma, and in a 2-game stretch against Oklahoma and TCU, did not miss a single 2-point shot. That's 12 attempts. He also, I believe, carried that into the Kansas State game, and I believe had a stretch where he had 14 consecutive makes from 2. And so for him to end up being arguably the most efficient player in the Big 12, it's incredible. Never would have imagined that after the stretch he had between Providence, Tennessee, and Gonzaga, and even before the season. Like, as good of a player as he was at UTEP, I don't think efficiency was necessarily his strong suit. I mean, he's someone that in the season before transferring, he had a true shooting percentage of 54. Obviously, the season before that was 56%, but that was on really a steady dosage of, I would say, easier shots. And he was able to come into the Big 12 against top-tier defenses, be a lead player, really kind of take on a lot of the offensive responsibility, maintained a pretty high usage rate throughout the season, and still put up ridiculous efficiency. Like you mentioned, the Udoka Azubuike line. I think that's important to hit home. Like, Williams was not doing this in conference play as a rim runner or as someone that was taking open catch and shoot threes. He was taking contested shots. He was taking hard inside looks. He was having to expand his game to the perimeter quite a bit. Teams were really throwing a variety of different looks at him, and he responded. And I mean, that's really impressive. I think the evolution of Bryson Williams over the course of the season really sort of raised Tech's floor and raised its ceiling and allowed it to become a much better offensive team as a result.
Yeah, one of the best offensive conference seasons I've seen from a Texas Tech player in quite a while. Want to take a look at his future and where he could be headed next. But first, a quick word from BetOnline. BetOnline is your number one source for all your betting needs and sports info. Find all the latest sports developments, including this week's Masters Championship odds, podcast, and reviews for all the different leagues this season. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Unfortunately, Bryson Williams is out of eligibility, ends his college career playing 5 seasons, 2 at Fresno State, 2 at UTEP, and 1 at Texas Tech, even spent an off year at UTEP. So he is a grown man at this point. No more college basketball left to play, which is a sad thing. But now he gets to go chase his dreams and potentially play professional basketball somewhere. Emery, I know you and I both talk draft a lot. I know that a lot of people see Bryson Williams as Texas Tech's best offensive player, which I think they should, but they automatically equate that to being a high-round draft pick. Tell me where you think Bryson Williams stands in terms of getting drafted right now and maybe some reasoning behind that.
I'm going to be completely honest. I feel like the biggest knock against Bryson Williams is going to be his age. And it's going to be the fact that until this year, there really wasn't a set role that you could find for him in the NBA. Because as much as 96 shots from 3 is, it's still not a good enough sample for him to be a complete pick and pop player. Obviously, you're not going to see the ball thrown into him in the post in the NBA. That's just not how things work out. And you're not going to trust him as a ball handler. So offensively, I'm skeptical of teams using him as finding roles for him offensively, but certainly his defensive evolution helped. I still think at the end of the day, there is room for him to play in the NBA. I'm a firm believer in that. But with that said, I don't think he's going to get drafted. I think he's going to be right on the fringes. It wouldn't surprise me if a team took a late selection. I mean, certainly, we've seen it in the past, but at the same time, that's generally in the range of the draft and stash guys, the guys that you don't really want to have explicit contract rights with someone as old as Bryson Williams, who's kind of already more of a developed product, you might not see that be as much of an enticing option. But I do think he's going to get a look. I certainly would be shocked if he wasn't playing Summer League. And at a minimum, if he wants to, I feel like the two-way route is definitely open to him if that's what he wants to pursue.
Yeah, so I covered the NBA for a long time before transitioning into full-time Texas Tech coverage. And spending that amount of time around people in the league and in league offices, NBA scouts care a lot about young athletes. Like, I think a lot of people would argue they care about it to a fault. And I think that they overlook some really good players in the process of that. Gonna go ahead and roast the Dallas Mavericks for overlooking Desmond Bane and drafting Josh Green, who is a young athlete and is playing good basketball right now. But Desmond Bane is looking like arguably one of the most improved players in basketball right now. Regardless, that's another episode, another podcast for another time. With that emphasis that scouts have, I don't think Bryson Williams will get drafted. I think that he's not a draftable prospect at this point. But I'll put money on this. Bryson Williams will be on an NBA roster next season. Regardless of if he's a two-way player, if he finds himself on an E10 after the draft and ends up sticking around for camps, this is going to be a guy that's going to find himself in the league at some point. Like his ability to score, it's not going to be overlooked. He's going to end up somewhere on like an E10 contract, which is essentially where guys get brought in to play camp. If you're not familiar, you can read more about it. Google Exhibit 10. But Bryson Williams is going to get to that stage, and people are going to be like, who is this guy? And I'm not saying that he's going to get there and then be a bona fide NBA starter, but what he is going to do is he's going to fight for a roster spot. And I would be very, very surprised if he does not find himself regularly playing in the NBA at some point. I think 2A is probably the most realistic trajectory for him at this point. I think that's probably where he'll be next year. But man, this guy, he's got a very, very good chance to be there. And if he ends up playing overseas, which gets way more flack than it should, it's a very, very good career route. He's going to be a monster. Whatever league he ends up playing in, he is going to be a very, very consistently good player overseas. So at this point, you're looking at a win-win situation for Bryson Williams. I mean, the future for like a 25-year-old is very, very bright.
Yeah, let's make no mistake about it. Even if he isn't draftable, this season at Tech helped immensely in terms of getting his name out there. The skill set is obviously there. He's going to be a professional level scorer. I mean, I do think that NBA front offices, like you mentioned, they have a tendency to look at athleticism. And when they don't, they oftentimes look for sort of fit and skill set based analysis, which I do think is something that maybe plays against Bryson Williams, which was arguably a positive for him at the college level and his versatility and sort of the amount of different things he could do. In NBA teams, if they're looking for back into the roster guys, a lot of times they'll look for specific skill sets that they can really utilize. Or if they're not doing that, obviously they look for athletes and projects. So that's a little bit of something that is a concern there. But obviously, I mean, he's going to go on the short list of guys, and this is a line from Fran Fraschilla to steal. He's on the short list of guys that you're not going to want to scrimmage your top tier prospect against, whether it be in NBA workouts or even when you start getting into the offseason camps and whatnot, or playing in Vegas. He's that good. He's not someone who's going to go down lightly. And I feel like if his ambition for next year is to find his way onto the back end of a roster, I have no doubt that he can do it. It might be, like you mentioned, in the two-way situation. It might be in an E10 contract, and certainly he'll have to fight his way through camp to get into that position. But I mean, I've got faith in him. I think at a bare minimum, if he wants to, he's going to get that opportunity in camp and just see where he can show out. And I mean, like you mentioned, you're playing overseas gets way too much flack. I mean, guys can make good money there. There's competitive basketball all over the world being played, high-level guys, regardless of where you go. And I mean, there's a spot for Bryson Williams. I don't know if it's going to be in the NBA long term. It might be something that he kind of dabbles around with over the next couple of years. Maybe one season he tries Europe, one season he kind of sticks to the U.S. to try to get his option, get his foot in the door. But regardless, I expect wherever he goes, he's going to have a role. If it's overseas, I could see him being a really, really, really good player at that level and making a lot of money from that. And if it's in the NBA, I think his ability to score and just his pure offensive ability and versatility is going to win out. And it might not be something where he's going to be in the rotation for a while, but he's got the potential. Obviously, the age is working against him, but we've seen a lot of development from him in the last year. So what's to say he can't continue adding on to the skills? And as much as he doesn't look like a good athlete, the ability for him to improve his lateral to be a good switcher is something that's going to buy him more time in the league, and I'm confident of that.
Any closing thoughts on Bryson Williams? I mean, got to be one of my favorite Red Raiders in recent memory. Very glad he chose to spend his final year of college in Lubbock.
I wish he was playing for a certain team tonight against Kansas, but aside from that, yeah, I mean, Bryson Williams, coming into the season, we were really high on him. Obviously, we both had our doubts over the course of the season, but man, I mean, I can't think of where this Tech team would be without him, and it's going to be a massive replacement to find ways to replace his production and his efficiency and just his ability to kind of fit in with whatever role you needed him to play. Because, I mean, having guys that can both operate as a pick and pop big and also be extremely efficient on the inside and operate as a nifty post player and as a pure strength guy as well when he's on mismatches can't be overstated. So the positional versatility he offered on the offensive end, it's remarkable. And as a whole, really good player, really hard worker, and I can't wait to see what he does in the future.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in to our first player performance review of this offseason. Be sure that you are following our podcast feed wherever you get podcasts. Also, be sure that you are subscribed to our YouTube channel because we now have, 13 more of these to go. So we will have plenty of content on the docket, fresh and available for you. So be sure that you are tuned in. You can also keep up with all the content we are letting out on our individual Twitters. You can follow me at rmainvillelbk. You can follow Emery at eraser41. And then be sure that you are following the official Locked On Texas Tech Twitter page so you never miss an episode at Locked On TTU. In the meantime, thanks for making Locked On Texas Tech your first listen every day. Now make your second listen Locked On NFL Draft. Ryan Tracy and former NFL cornerback Eric Crocker bring the NFL Draft to life every day with insight and analysis on college football prospects and NFL front offices. It's free and available wherever you get podcasts. Thanks for joining us, and we